What's all this about a scandal at the UK Post Office? Well, in today's episode of What's All This, we are going to learn all about how the British Post Office wrecked the lives of thousands of its Sub Postmasters who were overall well-respected pillars of the community and were loyal to the post office, yet they were unjustly one by one accused of stealing post office funds, and if they didn't pay, they were thrown into jail. They had no access to the post office's accounts system and couldn't therefore question the figures. According to their contracts, they were in the wrong. It took over 20 years for justice to prevail. In the meantime, lives were thrown in turmoil, marriages broke up, upright citizens were jailed, and there was seemingly nothing that could be done about it. So, how did the post office get away with this, and how did this all begin?
If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Also, leave a comment down below about what you would like to watch next, and I will do my best to provide content you guys want to know about. Now back to today's content.
Our story begins with considering the life as a sub postmaster in England during the 1990s. So, what exactly is a sub postmaster? Sub postmasters are self-employed business operators, approved by the UK Post Office to act as their agents in running post office branches, also referred to as outlets. The post office had long been an integral part of most communities. In particular, one sub postmaster, a Mr. Alan Bates, started his first job as a postman back in 1965. Eventually, he became a sub postmaster in 1994, following a successful interview. And everything was great from Mr. Bates' view, who served his community well. Typically, in this role it is diverse, including assisting pensioners who would call in each week to collect their pension, and most sub-postmasters carried the attitude that they are far more than an administrator, becoming an advisor to people and very much considered to hold an important role. Most of the thousands of sub-postmasters in the 1990s were there as a long-term career that would see them into retirement, and was their job of choice. Now enter a new computer system introduced by the UK Post Office designed to be state-of-the-art. However, as we will see, it ended up being the center of one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in British legal history. The British postal system dates way back to the year 1660. Of course, it relied 100% on pen and paper to record transactions and keep the books balanced. Let's skip all the many iterations that transpired during the ages and advance to the turn of last century to the 1990s. The British Post Office upper management introduced a completely new computer system, named as Horizon, which was owned and managed by Fujitsu. At the time, it was the biggest IT rollout in Europe. This involved connecting over 40,000 post office computer terminals throughout the country and connected them all to just one central hub. From the individual sub-postmaster's point of view, almost no communication of the rollout was given, most finding out when service technicians arrived and connected the new equipment, and advising it would be live someday soon. They would be advised further very soon. Despite this, initially the system was received well by the sub-postmasters, and they looked forward to this making their roles more efficient. However, soon enough problems became evident as the books would not balance, so to speak. Within 2 months, there were discrepancies of several £1,000s happening in several of the sub-postmasters' branch locations. Now here is where the core of the problem was. There was no way of going back and checking the figures because the information was held by the post office. The sub-postmasters had no access to it. Therefore, what the Horizon system said was to be taken as the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And there was absolutely no way to argue against it. In one instance, a sub-postmaster was showing as having a £2,000 deficit, and so she called the Horizon help desk. She was advised to make various adjustments to her terminal at her post office branch. However, the original £2,000 shortfall now doubled to £4,000. She was told there was no one else with any problems, and clearly, she was wrong. This became the common denominator. Numerous sub-postmasters were experiencing the same sort of discrepancies, sometimes in the tens of thousands of pounds. And they were consistently advised they were the only ones with the issue. This gaslighting by Horizon was very effective at making the sub-postmasters doubt themselves. Contractually, each sub-postmaster was personally liable for any shortfall. So it was not long before the post office began issuing letters of demand, no matter what the cause was. This led many to use their own funds to just make the shortfall go away and avoid legal action. However, the problems continued, and there was no end in sight. Eventually, the amounts they had to pay back became exhausted their resources and was too great to pay back. So they began facing the prospect of serious legal ramifications, with each one thinking they were the only one. Now we consider the Sub Postmaster Mr. Alan Bates. He received advice he was short for an amount around £1,000. However, he would not accept he was wrong. He disputed the Horizon Systems figures. He received the same threats the other postmasters had. He still refused to comply. He knew he had not misappropriated any funds. He demanded at the very least he needed access to how Horizon had arrived at the amount they were claiming, this surely being fair. Eventually, the post office decided to terminate his contract without citing any reason. Effectively, they walked off with his life savings and assigned the branch to someone else without any recourse. This was by now going on all over the country. This left each one of the affected sub-postmasters in serious financial, emotional, and personal stress. Many members of the community held them in contempt. It also led some to attempt suicide. Their health began declining. Marriages were breaking up, huge debts were mounting, and many were sentenced to jail. One of the tactics the post office employed was to offer to drop the charge of theft. If they pleaded guilty to false accounting just before court appearance, this was because it was easier for the post office to gain a court win on the lesser charge. It was pitched as being a way to avoid jail. However, in many cases they still received jail sentences despite going along with it. Still, all the while each sub-postmaster thought they were the only one with these issues, and that they had somehow messed up. Carl Flinders, who is a journalist for Community Weekly, a London publication, heard of the plight of the sub-postmasters through his own local sub-postmaster and considered running an article on the situation. However, he thought it was limited to 4 or 5 sub-postmasters. This was when social media was in its infancy, so although numerous sub-postmasters were being prosecuted, each one of them thought they were the only one. However, this was about to change due to Carl Flinders' reporting. Carl mentioned the plight of his local sub-postmaster to one of his colleagues, who told Carl he had heard this before. So, Carl began to dig, and it wasn't long before that he realized the scale of the situation was widespread and rampant. However, Carl Flinders was so worried about potential legal action from running the story that he didn't run the story for a year. When he did run it, here was the response from the post office. The post office Horizon system is extremely robust. It is regularly tested and scrutinized, and we do not have any complaints from sub-postmasters. Clearly this was an outright lie. By this point there were 7 sub-postmasters Carl Flinders had interviewed who had been through the ringer, and he knew there must be numerous others also affected. Following the publishing of the story, a wave of affected sub-postmasters contacted the Community Weekly with their stories, and soon the scale of the deceit became evident. This led Alan Bates to begin a campaign to act as spokesman for all the others, so he began one by one to establish contact through the Community Weekly. In order to coordinate a meeting, Bates set up a meeting at Penny Compton, as this was a central location relative to all sub-postmasters. He was not sure if any would attend, but they all did. One by one they all told each other their stories. People had been cashing in their pensions, borrowing money off relatives. They all had the resemblance like they'd just been in a war and just weary with the stress that we've been put through and the shame of it. Unanimously they voted Alan Bates to become chairman of the campaign. They knew it was going to be a David and Goliath battle. Little did Alan Bates know, but this would become a 20-year battle for justice. But he couldn't leave it go because everyone's life was being ruined. A member of Parliament, Lord Arbuthnot, now became involved in the battle. This began opening doors, as it was considerably easier for a member of Parliament to meet and with the chairman of the post office to talk through what was happening. Another member of Parliament, James R. Bathurst, also got involved and met with many of the affected individually. He arranged a meeting with the then chief executive of the post office, Paul Vanells. Paul was hired by the post office in 2007 and by 2012 had worked her way into the top job, utilizing her own PR skills to garner support from the Sub Postmasters, claiming in her calming voice they were right at the forefront of everything. Following James Bathurst's meeting with Paul Vanells, she suggested what was needed was a forensic look into the Horizon accounting system, with a view to testing the allegations of unfairness. James agreed. Paul recommended a Mr. Ron Warmington who ran a company called Second Sight oversee the investigation. Alan and the MPs decided they also needed an independent forensic specialist, not affiliated with the post office, so they also bought in their own accountant. Kay Linnell was a skilled accountant and volunteered her services. Kay was deeply disheartened that so many were losing everything at the hands of a non-caring behemoth of an organization, and wanted to help. It became apparent the Ron Warmington of Second Sight was indeed a valid choice, and the others would act as being helpful as well. So it became a strong conglomeration of experts in forensic accounting with Second Sight at the lead. The investigation got underway in 2012. The post office was at that time continuing to prosecute the Sub Postmasters. As the investigation, it became clear the post office has some serious answers to provide. It was found their investigative processes were almost non-existent. It became clear they would need to gain access to the Horizon system. Therefore, they lobbied the post office for access. Remote access was always a concern because someone remotely could access it without knowledge. However, the post office was adamant the system could not be accessed by anyone. The physical servers of the system were located by Horizon's maker Fujitsu. Second Sight needed to prove if it was indeed able to be tampered with. Michael Rudkin, who formed part of the investigative team and was also a former Sub Postmaster and union representative, was assigned to visit the Horizon facility in Berkshire, and he was impressed by the stringent security and how it was impossible to gain access to where the servers were located without an escort. Once inside where the Horizon terminals were located, Ron cited 2 Horizon terminals such as those normally at a post office branch set out on a workbench. Ron's escort introduced the staff in that area as his covert operations team, and was told he was in the covert operations room. He then proceeded to manipulate one of the terminals and enter directly into a particular account, and proceeded to alter figures. Michael questioned him, asking, "Are you amending these figures in real time?" And he said yes, absolutely, offering as proof to amend the euro figures at this Bronx accounts right there and then in front of Michael. So, Michael then confirmed with him, "So you are amending these figures live in real time?" To which he was told yes, absolutely, and agreed the branch had no knowledge this was happening. Suddenly his escort realized he had revealed secret information and ended the meeting abruptly and rushed Michael out of the facility. Following being ejected from the meeting, the post office auditors paid Michael a visit and said they had found a £44,000 discrepancy with his terminal and his wife Susan, who was managing that post office, was convicted with 300 hours community service and electronically tagged for 6 months. In 2013, Second Sight published their initial findings. Now this was in the public domain. Paul Vanells wanted a mediation meeting. So, Alan Bates put forward 150 cases of affected Sub Postmasters. However, by now these cases had dragged on for years, and mediation is supposed to be a process that has a willingness to settle. However, at the meeting the post office assigned to lawyers who said, "It's been over 6 years now, you're out of time, so forget any compensation." In Westminster at Parliament, it became highlighted more, and this put the spotlight back on Paula Vanells. She was summoned to a meeting. Prior to the meeting, communications between her and other ministers showed she was planning how to avoid heated and loaded questions with a view to avoid the heat. The P.S. wanted to know why Second Sight's investigation was obstructed, and really pressed Paula for an answer. However, Paula would not provide a straight answer. It was pointed out to her she was in charge of the post office organization, but she kept dodging any resolution. It now became more evident than ever this was a massive corporate cover-up. It had now been more than 10 years, and with 10 years' worth of documentation, Alan Bates sought to find a legal representation to carry this out. James Hartley, who was a prominent attorney, contacted Alan Bates and arranged a meeting. His law firm agreed to take on the litigation as a class action, due to most of the Sub Postmasters being financially compromised. Eventually 555 Sub Postmasters joined in the class action. Finally, the Postmasters Alliance, as they had so named themselves, came to have their time in court against the mighty post office organization with Justice Fraser presiding. The goal was to seek financial compensation. Many had had their lives devastated by the post office, having suffered divorces, bankrupted, imprisoned, and demoralized. Gathering the evidence had been so difficult because the post office held all the evidence. What transpired was that the post office had to relinquish evidence that they had consistently avoided previously parting with on the basis it was irrelevant, and other stalling tactics. One piece at a time the evidence was presented, and it proved clearly their issues with the Horizon system from day one. The decision handed down by Justice Fraser in a 330-page judgment outlined the findings against the Horizon system. Within the judgment, Justice Fraser said the approach by the post office in dealings with its sub-postmasters amounted to assertions and denials that ignore what has occurred, and amounts to the 21st century equivalent of maintaining the earth is flat. He went on to say there was a culture of secrecy and excessive confidentiality within the post office organization. The win was certainly well received, but was somewhat of a hollow victory financially. The settlement asked for $57.5 million, however. After all legal costs, the sub-postmasters were left with only about £20,000 each. Nonetheless, the court victory did allow the sub-postmasters to appeal their criminal convictions and thus clear their names. To date, 93 out of 736 sub-postmasters affected have had their names cleared. So it is an ongoing problem with years of pain yet to go through. A statutory inquiry was organized in 2022, but continual dodging of questions seems to be all that happened. It is felt by most that the people responsible have escaped punishment, while those that went through the pain have endured unspeakable injustice and ruination. Paula Vanells left the post office in 2019 and in 2020 was awarded a CB for services to the post office. In contrast, Alan Bates refused to accept an O while Paula Vanells still has her CB. Compensation of £600,000 from the UK govt has been offered to the 93 postmasters with convictions overturned. This equates to about £6,500 each. It has been discovered that 3,500 sub-postmasters were affected by the Horizon computer system. Paula Vanells has publicly said she is sorry for the distress caused to sub-postmasters and their families. Fujitsu has also apologized for its role in the sub-postmasters' sufferings. The post office has stated £130 million in compensation has been made to date and is deeply sorry, and encouraged anyone yet to seek compensation to come forward.
Thank you for listening. Please join me next time when we will delve into another episode.